You are listening to KC Sports Network, the #1 podcast network for today's Kansas City sports fans. With former players from your favorite teams, informed perspectives, and former insiders, this is the place for you. KC Sports Network is proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
Welcome to Booth Review presented by Emprise Bank. You can open an account with Emprise Bank in less than 5 minutes. The savings just start there, though. Emprise is a trusted partner with a variety of products and services to help you achieve your goals. Don't be tethered to a brick building. Start a meaningful relationship with a bank that has your best in mind. That's Emprise Bank, member FDIC, our partner in possible. They've been absolutely wonderful to work with. It's been wonderful working with Scott Chasen. Find him on Twitter at Jason Scott. And our guest already shaking his head.
No, Kent, I saw this coming, and when I heard meaningful relationship, I was like, that's what Kent is going to say. I also predicted the Swain eye roll. This is Michael Swain joining us. He does an amazing job covering Kansas for 24/7 Sports. Michael, I believe you are M Swain 247. Is that correct?
Yep, still the same one.
So you can find him on Twitter. And Michael, it's great to have on the podcast for a couple of reasons, one of which is he covered Iowa State, who is Kansas's next opponent. So I know, Kent, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about KU. But I want to ask you guys about something that Lance Leipold said today that, Kent, we've kind of been debating in Twitter DM messages, which is that Lance Leipold basically said if KU gets too concerned about the stuff happening outside the program, the rankings, what people think nationally, that this success will be, quote, just a blip. He said that a couple of times in a couple different answers. Where do you guys think the program is at? What are you expecting to see? And Kent, we talked about this. Michael, if you want to go first, what do you think about how KU handled expectations in the last game?
I've been impressed with the way they've been able to do it so far because obviously this is a program that hasn't had to deal with a lot of success. And I think you look back at recent history and, the last kind of pseudo-successful team, 2019, wasn't really great after wins. You think about that Texas Tech game and the K-State game that followed, that was a team that didn't really deal with success that well. And I think you look at Lance Leipold bringing some of those Buffalo guys in, right? You look at the team captains, Mike Nowitzki, Rich Miller, guys that were at Buffalo and dealt with success there. I think it starts with the head coach and the assistant coaches too, all knowing how to handle success and having a lot of it, especially at, you think about D3 level, Wisconsin Whitewater. They went 3 seasons without losing a game. Like, that's pretty impressive. And so you learn how to deal with winning then. And I think just the player-led culture allows you to deal with it. So I've been pretty impressed so far. And even if guys are talking about it on Twitter on Sunday, I don't think it's something that bleeds into practice or things that they're really thinking about when you really get in kind of the heart of a game week.
I thought they handled expectations pretty well this week, honestly. It felt I was there at the booth. We were all there at the booth, I believe, right? I mean, you guys
party at the booth. Everyone in town, everyone in Kansas was at the booth, Kent.
You guys were in the press box, probably eating free popcorn or whatever. I was paying, to stand in line for mine. But I don't know. I thought the expectations, you could kind of feel it, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like you could kind of feel it in the stands, like. The 50,000 people there were just dying to celebrate. They were dying to celebrate something. And I think it started a little tense at first. I kind of think the Daniel Highshaw run, the big catch. I don't know if we talked about this on the show or not,
yeah,
but
we did.
I think that's what busted through a little bit and just kind of made it a little bit normal. I think things were a lot more normal for the most part after that. Obviously, defense let him back in a little bit and stuff like that, but I kind of feel like that was the play that kind of changed some things. And I know that there's expectations still for this program. And I was going to talk about this today a little bit, but I kind of wonder, and we'll get to the predictions in the Iowa State game a little bit here, but like, I kind of feel like this is the perfect cocktail of where this team should be sitting right now of, hey, they're not ranked. They didn't get ranked. So you got the disrespect. They're not ranked, so you're not getting the national attention of being ranked. And they're probably a little upset about that. They've gotten through and they've broken through that wall of expectations a little bit, where I think this next game might be a little bit easier for them to navigate emotionally, and this week might be easier to handle than the Duke game, even though this is a more difficult football team to be preparing for. I think, like, emotionally, I could see this actually being a decent kind of space for KU to be in, honestly.
Yeah, I think you both made points that are kind of where I'm at. Like, Michael, what you brought up about the Buffalo guys who transferred, who came with Lance Leipold and joined this team. Like, locker rooms are not homogenous. There are going to be 10, 15 guys in that locker room who are paying attention to every single thing that's going on with rankings and national media. And, oh, we didn't end up on SportsCenter. That's annoying, and texting everyone. There's going to be 10, 15 guys who just don't care. And then there's a bunch of other guys who are going to be in between, and maybe more of both categories. But I tend to think those Buffalo guys have done a really good job of like settling people down, making them kind of helping them get through the sort of week to week grind and understand things. Kent, I think you're right. I think Kansas not being ranked, not getting all that national buzz gives them a chip. It gives them something to work with. And I'm still a little bit concerned. Michael, you mentioned 2019. I feel like I've covered enough KU teams that win one game and then the next week lay an egg, and you hear that they like took an opponent lightly. And I know you're in the same boat. I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm not super concerned. Any level of concern there with you that this might be a week where KU gets a little bit of a reality check?
I think it will be to some degree, because I think if you were to ask Iowa State fans, they'd tell you the same thing you just said about Kansas, where Iowa State fans look at Kansas right now and say, hey, they're getting all the national love. Everyone's picking them to cover the 3.5 point spread. They're picking them to, go deep in Big 12 plays, maybe a Big 12 dark horse. And I think from their perspective, it's all right, let's go in and ruin that party. And I think equally for Kansas, they do have the chip on their shoulder. And I think that too, this team can be good when they do have that chip on their shoulder. I don't think they've maybe been in that position a ton at this point, where they've been kind of the team that has been slighted in some way, because in the past it's been zero expectations like last year. And so far this year, you're playing as house money. So it's definitely a different situation than I think they've been in any other week this season. And it makes it really interesting, because I think you do look at the leadership of the team, right? Jalen Daniels does not care about this stuff. I can tell you that pretty soundly. You think about him, the other leaders on defense, they're guys that just don't care. Like Craig Young's at Ohio State, and he understands what it's like to be ranked and in the college football playoff. And yet I don't think he's going to be too caught up about this. So I think they have the leadership to work with it, but I do still agree that this is a different spot than I think they've been in all season.
But the guys you're outlining are exactly the guys that you want not paying attention to that kind of thing. You mentioned player-led program. We don't use that word very often around here, but that is one of the mantras that Lance Leipold tries to instill in this, and part of this culture is making it player-led. Well, the leadership for this program does seem to have a really good head on their shoulders. And and that the Buffalo point's great, because I think they were there when Mike Nowitzki and Rich Miller were there when Buffalo was ranked. I mean, they are not unfamiliar with some level of expectation. And so, and Jalen Daniels' response, I think Lance Leipold might have even made some kind of comments about Jalen's leadership in the last week or so, kind of in that same type of vein. And I mean, Swain might have asked the question. Swain, what, like, were we 13 in 2019?
Oh, 13.
I
wasn't able to drink. How about that?
I was about to say, like, what high school newspaper were you writing for 2019? You guys are both both.
Kent does this every time. By the way, I just had a birthday. Kent didn't wish me happy birthday because he doesn't want to acknowledge that I'm approaching him in age and expertise. Clearly,
here's the thing, Scott. When you get a year closer to me, I'm just right behind you, just getting farther away from you still. I'm in my 30s, by the way. Like, this is just I know. And
that's the much less iconic Mike Gundy quote, by the way. He said,
I'm 33. Come after me. Swain, you're gonna love your 20s, buddy. I can't believe how good you are at this. But Scott already got to say all the wonderful things about you. But I'm a subscriber to 24/7, and I am an immense fan of your work. So I was very excited that we got you on. Just like,
no, I appreciate it.
Wonder Kid, anyway, sorry.
All right, well, hey, I want to talk a little football here real quick, because Lance said something today too. He said that if I'm paraphrasing, but if KU plays Iowa State like they played Duke, they're going to get beat. And he kind of implied that they would get beat in other games too. For sure. I rewatched the game today. I actually rewatched, Ken, I know you did too, both this one and the Iowa State one today. So I had a very productive day, if you guys were wondering. No, I noticed a few things. I did think early Mike Nowitzki and Jared Casey, per usual, were like dominant at blocking, but I thought the blocking had some problems as the game went on. I even thought Mike Nowitzki allowed a pressure at one point where he allowed a guy to kind of cross in front of him and get right by him and put pressure on Jalen Daniels. We haven't really seen that. I thought the cornerbacks tackled. Kent, we talked about that after the game. I thought schematically KU did some good things at times, but I also thought Jalen made some questionable decisions with the, when to give, when not to give, or maybe Duke was just better scouted for it. Where do you guys see Kansas right now? Beyond being 4-0, is first of all, is Kansas just like a good football team? Because I think the answer is yes to that, but how good and where do you kind of see them in the Big 12?
Well, I think they're a team that hasn't played their best game yet. And I think it's a really good spot to be in if you're 4-0 and you still haven't played your best football yet. I think you look at offensively, Jalen Daniels each week is showing you something different. And I think that's really impressive, right? On Saturday, it was kind of his arm talent that he really flashed. And I do agree, Scott, that some of those gives and reads, he maybe wasn't the sharpest. But I think also going into the game, you knew that Duke was going to be the most well-drilled team KU was going to face to this point. Because as we saw with Houston, they really weren't well drilled and they got a fight on the sideline. And you go to West Virginia and their defensive coordinator sat up the next Tuesday talking about, we didn't know what was coming. So you kind of knew that this was going to be the test for the option game and how it works. And I'm sure we'll talk about Iowa State and how that fits there. But I think that it's a good position to be in for Kansas, where offensively they're putting up 30 points every game. They're going to walk off the bus and score 30. And yet there's still points in the game where you can look at the offense and say, wow, there's a lot of room for improvement. I think for a coaching staff too, like this one, I'm sure they're going to love that. Like Andy Koldenecki is probably licking his chops at that because he can go in and say, hey guys, we weren't perfect. We need to work on this, this, and this. And we still scored 35 and probably could have scored over 40 as well. You think about fumble in the red zone, at the goal line, getting a stand there. And I think defensively, it's just one of those deals where as the season goes along, they're going to get better. They've got a new piece in Craig Young. He's playing a really complex position at the Hawk spot. And I think that is one that as the season goes along and he gets more comfortable, I think he's going to have a bigger and bigger impact. And I think as the secondary gets more comfortable playing together, because as much as OJ Burrows played last year, he wasn't necessarily the down in, down out starter. And you look at Jacoby Bryant and Romello Dotson, those two guys were rotating for each other. So you've got a whole secondary, I think, is trying to find a groove. And so the fact that Key's in the spot is just, it's obviously foreign, but it's just a good position to be in for any football team. You haven't lost yet, and yet there's still a lot of room for improvement.
I think this offense has to have at least a B+ performance every week moving forward for them to be competitive. And so like the bar to clear for the offense is, I think, very high. I think this is always going to be a team that's going to run through its offense. They'll go as far as that offense can take them. Can they go toe to toe? Because they're going to be in some shootouts. They're going to be in some games where the margin for error is just not going to be particularly big. And I think that's the case, kind of moving forward, especially getting into the teeth of Big 12. Now, the good news is I think that offense will go nuts a couple times in the next 8 games. I don't expect it to be, tamed all too much, all too consistently. I think, Duke was a different challenge for this group, I think, in a lot of different ways. I think they were willing to play a little bit more downhill. I think they were attacking the ball and playing with great discipline and trying to be physical at the point of attack. To your point, Swain, I actually think, though, watching back a little bit, I'm not going to say KU was vanilla, but they were probably a little bit more vanilla offensively than that they've been in the last few weeks. And I think it was a little bit more traditional drop back. So if you want to talk about the quote unquote wrinkle that we saw this week, I think a little bit more drop back. They threw a few things out there that, we talk about time stealing all the time here on this show. The 2 QB stuff's going to steal some time and all that kind of stuff. But I think Duke did a good job of taking some things away from Kansas. I think Kansas held some stuff back. So there's a little bit of me that, I expect this offense to continue to evolve. I still think that they have probably enough to catch a few people, a few teams, here or there, and it might even start at Iowa State. I think there's some places they could take this offense potentially where they could surprise even an Iowa State defense a little bit. So I don't know. I think it's always just going to fall on the offense. I think the defense is going to perform capably, but I don't know if there's a ceiling high enough for this defense to kind of carry this team moving forward. And I think that's where it's going to get a little hairy for the remainder of the season, honestly.
You said B+. I kind of feel like KU was at a B+ against Duke.
I'll push back a little bit. I actually think it's a little bit lower than that.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I think the thing that brings it up was I thought Jalen was so pinpoint in big moments with how he threw the ball. But yeah, the rest of the offense, like, it's funny, the best executed play of the game, I wrote it down because I really liked the play. It might have been the first play of the game. Like KU ran a triple option counter. Jared Casey kind of went in, broke out as a lead blocker. They handed it off. I think it was Devin Neal. He got a first down run on first down. And after that, I was like, I'm not sure KU actually executed a single play where like every single guy, really after the first drive of the game, like the offensive line was moving people. Duke wasn't in maybe the best spots. And when they were, KU's playmakers made plays. I did think it was a little bit downhill from there after that. That's why I'm kind of really interested in this game because I saw an Iowa State defense that swarmed to the ball, that got there more often than not. But you even heard Matt Campbell talk about this today. Like Iowa State was probably really unhappy with like eye discipline and players just doing their job in that game against Baylor, including on a trick play. They got burned deep a couple of times. They let somebody run by them and maybe the quarterback didn't make a throw or see it and get it to them. Ken, I said this to you earlier today. I don't expect that to be a problem again because it showed up last week, which means for KU, then you have to execute so much better just to get to that point. I think that's kind of the one thing I'm looking at is if Iowa State shows up and plays the option right and has guys in the right positions, what counters can KU throw back at them to maybe exploit that a little bit?
Well, and you got go Swing.
Well, just on the Iowa State subject, I think that defense is one that, with the secondary especially, it lends itself to a lot of busted coverages. That just happens. It's why Iowa State fans want to gouge their eyes out at it because a lot of times guys just get beat deep. And I think we saw that against Baylor a little bit, and I think that's just going to be a part of it where there's going to be a busted coverage on Saturday. I think it's just going to come down to can Jalen Daniels find the guy and make that pinpoint pass to take advantage of it because they are a defense that is pretty young and just a team overall that's young. So I kind of do expect some mistakes to pop up.
Ken, I just want to jump in on that real quick. I got to give Jalen Daniels credit for something. I didn't see it when it happened in real time. Third down throw to Quentin Skinner, end of the game, that first down. What I did not realize was the defender trailing him slipped. And Jalen Daniels threw that ball. At first, I thought he threw it in danger, didn't like the throw, even though it was completed just because it was such a risky throw. He threw it like 0.1 seconds after that guy stumbled. So just to your point on that, Swain, like Jalen was looking for that or looking for the breakout of the route. And the second the guy slipped, he identified it and found it. So I think that bodes well for Kansas, at least.
I think he throttled that. I think we talked about it during the post-game show. I think he actually throttled that down or throttled his receiver down a little bit too with that throw to keep him from getting hit too hard with some of that interior coverage. But we were talking, so like I don't want to get too nerdy about. I mean, we can get a little nerdy if we run.
Get a little nerdy, Ken.
We can get a little bit because I think I watched this game a little bit differently. In the preparation was a little bit different for me because like I think we have enough sample size of this offense. This team has cleared so many obstacles that I'm kind of looking at, I'm looking a little differently at these games, the game prep, right? And with Iowa State, this is like, I think this is the biggest game. We said last week was the biggest game in Kansas history for a long time. This one tops it now because of what's happened. This is a very defining moment, I think, for this season. Because I think if KU wins, like it's no longer just, oh, I hope they get to 6. It's like, okay, what's the ceiling here, right? Yeah. So Iowa State's defense, and Swain was there. They play this tight front. They play a 3-down look. They're going to keep 3 defensive linemen basically inside the tackles. They're going to play inside shades of the offensive tackles. They're going to play a nose very frequently. It's a tight front. You're going to see it's going to really kind of look and present like light boxes. 4 players in the box a lot of times, but there's a lot of overhangs. There's a 5 deep shell, but that shell's ready to fly down and get downhill to defend the run, right? And so one of the principles of this tight front is they're forcing you to spill everything wide outside of your tackles. A lot of your runs have to wind up outside of your tackles. It's really hard against that front to be able to kind of run downhill, run in between the tackles the way you want. So it's going, and it can be difficult to pull your guards. You've got to change some things about who you're pulling even. Like these are the things that this defensive front presents the problems for, right? Well, I think they've got they're going to have to adjust some things. I think that they can still operate with some of their base principles that they have in the past. Like I still think that they have the ability to run some of this option look and to run some of this. It's just going to be who they key off of, how they can slow down those tackles, the defensive tackles that are playing kind of inside the offensive tackles. It's going to be interesting to see how they're able to run, because teams don't have a lot of great success against this Iowa State front running, but also what wrinkles they're able to present to get onto the edge. I told Scott I think this could be a Sevy Morrison game because of the speed out on the edge and helping. He's a guy I'll throw one of the concepts I really like out of here. We saw KU running that empty look with, it was empty formation, but the back still on the field, jet motion. You've got, Jared Casey, right, 1-1 off of a tackle. I think that look could be something you see from Kansas this week, trying to spread, trying to get down to the edge. But then you brought it up, Swain. I know I'm going long. I've been thinking about this all day. You talked about coverage, right? I think this could be a Jalen Daniels passing game again. I think a lot of what teams are doing, and this is why Iowa State's so great, is they are making teams a lot more one-dimensional. I think this is one of those games where you're going to need Jalen Daniels to create with his legs when the play breaks down, but try to complete some big passes. Like I think those are kind of the elements I'm looking at and how this is going to be a very fascinating big game for this offense, because they can't line up. They just can't line up and beat them. Like they're gonna have to get creative and try to get some of these guys out on the edge.
And you look at I like that you mentioned the passing thing, because not to my own horn, but this is where the expertise comes in. This is the best secondary KU's going to play so far this year. You look at West Virginia and Houston, right? Their strength was not their secondary. It was the defensive line or front seven. Tennessee Tech doesn't count. And last week, Duke's starting cornerback was Datrone Young, who got run off at Iowa State. So you're looking at this Iowa State secondary. They've got a starting corner in TJ Tampa, 6'2", really long, hyper athletic. Played basketball in high school, had a dunk that went viral because everyone said it looked like LeBron James. And then Miles Purchase is a true sophomore who pushed for playing time over Datrone Young last year. And then they also moved their best corner from last season to go play field safety. So you've basically got 3 cornerbacks now that are playing in that defensive backfield out of those 5 defensive backs. And so I think this is going to be a really tough test for KU's wide receivers. I've been really impressed with the way that they've played so far this season. I think they've been one of the almost unsung parts of the offense, because I think going into the season, the question was, all right, well, how are you going to replace Kwame Lassiter? They've done it by committee, and that's been really impressive. And so I think this week is going to be really big, and I think it's going to be a good litmus test for this wide receiver room, because I just think these Iowa State corners are just purely more talented than KU's gone against this season. And if we show up and Saturday afternoon, those wide receivers getting free, that shows us that, hey, when you go and play in Oklahoma State, your wide receivers should be able to get some separation. And I think what you mentioned too about the defensive front is fascinating, because Iowa State's playing with 3 Mike linebackers. Colby Reeder, their Sam linebacker, who's doing kind of like the Mike Rose role for those that pay attention to Iowa State in the past. Like,
overhang, he's outside the box, but he's still a backer.
Exactly, but he's a Mike. And the issue is, if you go 4 wide, all of a sudden he's going to have to cover a slot receiver. All right, you have a mismatch there. Well, then you look at Jerry Vaughn, who's playing in the boundary. He was Orion Vance's, the Mike linebacker. He was his backup last year. So you're looking at the team having basically 3 Mike linebackers, 3 down linemen. So I think you're right. Speed is where this game will be won. And I'm fascinated to see how Daniel Highshaw does in this, because I like Daniel Highshaw a lot, and I think he's fun to watch. And interested to see how he fits into this, because obviously I think speed isn't his biggest asset. You saw him almost get caught on that 73-yard catch and run on Saturday.
He got caught a few times, Michael, on a few different runs where it was like, oh, he's got a crease, but he just couldn't kind of get through there.
And he doesn't have the breakaway speed. So I think it's just a fascinating matchup defensively versus KU's offense.
The thing that Daniel Highshaw has, though, that I think will be valuable in this game in particular, though, is you can run downhill, but there's a lot of tough yardage. There's a lot of tough yardage because the way that tight front works is it allows that back end of your defense to get downhill very quickly and downhill with a lot of violence. The good thing that Daniel Highshaw does have is it's the tough yards. He's the one best capable of getting the tough yards that are kind of a little bit more of that downhill variety, right? Like you're still going to need to try to ram it, a little bit. You're going to have to try to get your downhill runs going a little bit. And I think Daniel Highshaw is the guy that's probably the best equipped to handle the kind of pressure, the kind of contact, the kind of physicality that you're going to see when you are running a little bit more of that downhill run. Because you can't just avoid it altogether. You've got to do it a little bit. You got to do it enough. And that's where I think Highshaw is probably the best equipped to be able to be that guy for this game. This would be a nice game to have a little bit of Kai Thomas there too. I will say this, he's a guy that can handle a little bit of physicality. He's a little bit of a bigger back too. That would have been a nice guy to have in this game.
Yeah, Michael, I know you talked to Lance today. Did he say anything about Kai?
He gave a funny answer. He's like, he asked what the most vague answer he could give was. And
so
lower. He said it's a lower extremity. So I guess we're playing hockey now. But no, he says day to day. I think it's one of those things where you see how he does. The way Lance said on Saturday, it sounded like it's one of those deals where he's going to warm up and see how it feels. And it seemed like Saturday it wasn't a good day for whatever that lower extremity injury is. So it's one of those where we'll see on Saturday if he's warming up and if he's looking good, because if he feels good, I think he'll play. And I think KU could need that. We don't know how Devin Neal's feeling. And then outside of that, you just need as many backs as you can get against a physical team like Iowa State.
Yeah, I wanted to shout out actually Devin Neal for one thing before I ask you, Swain, about the Iowa State offense. But he had a play on a fourth down that, Ken, I don't think we talked about after the game, where they got the ball to him quick and he had to, it was like a 4th and 3 or something.
4th and 3, they threw in the flat.
Yeah, and he had to fight through either like a safety or a corner or someone, and he just dragged the guy. And I thought, I don't know, I think that was probably before he got dinged up. I know he came back in at the end of the game, but I thought that was a really impressive play. But yeah, there's a difference in between doing that against the defensive back and then doing the Daniel Highshaw bowling ball, down the middle of the line of scrimmage. So no, that one stood out. I wanted to ask you about Hunter Dekkers though. When I watched Iowa State Baylor, I got a very strong vibe, and this is one game, so it's why I want to ask you. I got a very strong, they don't trust this guy to take the game into his own hands. Like they're going to give him one read and go kind of vibe from him. I didn't see a whole lot of he's going to drop back. They're going to max protect. He's going to cycle through a few guys. I saw a lot of let's get the ball out of his hands really quickly. And honestly, probably should have had a couple picks in that game. I was not very impressed with Hunter Dekkers. I'm curious where you're at with him.
I think Brock Purdy is a good frame of reference. I think Tom Manning, their offensive coordinator, has trust issues, period. You look at Brock Purdy, right? Best quarterback in program history, and he was still a game manager as a senior. And you're looking at him now being the backup on the 49ers. That shows you that he's incredibly talented. And he just wasn't, there's a saying right in the NFL, right? Let Russ cook, or, they didn't let Brock Purdy cook. And he was very limited. And I think that's what they're doing with Hunter Dekkers too, because he's just a young guy. And at this point, he's more talented than Brock Purdy was, has a stronger arm, better athletically. He's a guy that within the Iowa State program, they were excited about going back to last year.
I remember you saying that, by the way. I remember you talking him up specifically, way in advance of this.
And the whole staff, the whole time has been, we're really happy we have Brock. He's great, but the next guy coming in might have the ability to be better. And now what you're seeing is a guy that's coming in that has the talent, but doesn't have the mental part of it fixed yet. And so I think that's what you're seeing is they're a little scared to let him rip it because he's turnover prone when he does. I haven't looked what the interceptable balls he's thrown yet, but I think 5 picks so far this season. KU's going to have a chance to pick off a pass from Hunter Dekkers or 2. It's just a question if they catch it because he's going to throw it to you a couple of times. And it's one of those things where I think as the season goes along, he'll get better. And I think the best part is you look at his eligibility. He's got so much left. So there's a lot of time to work with for him going forward. But for this game, for this season, he's just a young quarterback and he's got a lot of talent. He's got all the intangibles, but just mentally it's not there yet. And so really fascinating to see what Brian Borland does, because I don't think of KU being as a super complex scheme. I think they do the fundamentals really well, and really interested to see if KU tries some different stuff to try and maybe put them off, to where if Iowa State does go and throw, hey, maybe he has to think a split second more and it's a bad decision, or maybe Lonnie Phelps gets to him. So I think Deckers is one of these guys that in 3 years, he could be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. But I think for this season specifically, he's a guy that they're going to try and work around offensively.
Well, I think, they try to heat, they try to get a little bit more heat with like Craig Young. Like they're trying to send Craig Young. They're just trying to send their best athlete like Kyron Johnson last year at the quarterback a little bit, because they're just trying to generate some more quick pressure. Like, and that's something that I think they're emphasizing here the last couple of weeks. I agree. Like I'll say this, they have to get those turnovers if they're going to win this game.
Oh yeah.
So those opportunities, they have to get those turnovers. They have to finish those plays, or they're not going to win the game. They've got to get those when those opportunities present themselves, they've got to convert them. The other thing they got to do, and I was watching this, Iowa State has a great receiver, like a highly draftable top 50-ish potentially type receiver in Xavier Hutchinson.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that, and look, KU's defense is playing better. They're getting better. They're growing. The one thing, like that game against Duke would have looked a lot different if the offense had finished that first drive, and if they could have avoided that big explosive play down the sideline. I don't remember the receiver's name for Duke, but they threw a nice ball out there. It was a decent challenge at the catch point for Jacoby Bryant. Not the best, but it was a pretty good challenge. They've got to be better at the catch point just to eliminate those explosive down the sideline fades, because hey, look, you want to make an inconsistent quarterback play consistently down the field. Like that's the philosophy I think you've got to employ. So you've got to eliminate those big explosive plays where you're just trying to you've got to be really good challenging up at the catch point. I'd be throwing Tanaka Scott at all those kids, all those cornerbacks all week at practice, just try to really working with a big physical guy at the catch point, because I think that's going to be one of the big deciding factors, is if Iowa State's able to get one of those chunk plays on those vertical shots to a guy like Xavier Hutchinson.
Well, and you mentioned tackling earlier, right? Talking about the cornerbacks actually tackling against Duke. That's going to be huge, because Xavier Hutchinson is a guy that will catch it 8 yards from line of scrimmage and then take it 50, because that's how physical he is. He's a big, yards after catch guy. And I think that if Jacoby Bryant and Romello Dodson have bad tackling days after the catch, whether it be in the run game too, KU is going to be in for a long day, because that means the Iowa State offense is going to be able to get rolling, because someone like Xavier Hutchinson is just so hard to bring down that if you don't do it once he catches the ball, it's going to be really hard for Kenny Logan, OJ Burrows, Marvin Grant to get him down. I think I'm super high on Xavier Hutchinson. I think he's great. And he's also really good at making some of those kind of 50-50 catches that you wouldn't look at him and think, all right, this guy's going to go up and get it, but he can do that too.
Michael, if I remember correctly, didn't you write a feature on him?
Yeah. He's a great quote, and a great dude as well. Like, he was so fun to talk to, and I think I wrote like 3 or 4 features on him throughout my time there.
Yeah, I just remember you talking and also writing about him. But no, I'm really interested, especially coming off like both Romello Dodson and Kobe Bryant kind of got banged up from the first game that they were actually, hitting as hard as like Mike Lee would, or Kenny Logan or whatever. That was kind of those Kenny Logan injuries where I don't think we've seen it for a couple weeks now, but where Kenny Logan would get dinged up just because he would hit guys so hard, and then all of a sudden now he's down on the field. I'll give a quick shout to Romello Dodson, who I thought in previous years, and I've talked with some people in the program about this, had huge tackling issues, or really last year had huge tackling issues. I thought this game, he's been better all season. This last game, I thought he hit a number of times, and he had that one pass breakup in the end zone where he kind of batted the ball off the dude's face mask, which was kind of funny. He did get burned once. I think he gave up one of the touchdown catches for Duke, but no, I think Romello Dodson, Jacoby Bryant, how do they feel? Are they super sore? Do they feel physically healthy? Do they feel 100%? Because if not, you may need Kalen Gervin. You may need whoever you feel good about on the outside at this point. I think those 3 guys have dominated snaps at cornerback so far, and I'm curious how Kansas feels about the guys behind them.
Makes me sad that there's some Jarrett Paul rumors out there, or that has he for sure. I know that there's reports that he might have entered the portal. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it for sure that he has?
Yeah, he's no longer on the depth chart.
Okay, see, it would have been nice to have a Jarrett Paul around this week.
Yeah.
That's all I'm gonna say about
Jarrett
that.
Paul, if you can find one. Real quick, I want to do some predictions here with everyone. I'm really interested in this game because, to be honest, before I watched Iowa State Baylor, I was kind of thinking, I was pretty confident that I thought this would be the first time KU stumbles this year. Iowa State would win this game. Especially, it's just hard to win week after week after week after week. I still think Iowa State's the better team. And I think they're probably more like system-wise further along with where they are. I think KU is very far along in what it does creatively, offensively. But Iowa State's been a program with Matt Campbell that's just, it's had pieces. It's grown through that. And even with this new era, I think they retain a lot of that. So I'm still probably taking Iowa State to win this game. But first of all, if Kansas wins this game, I think the conversation becomes like, is Kansas a Big 12 title game contender? Like, where do you go from there? But certainly bowl game becomes a lot more, obvious and apparent that it is probably almost, not a certainty, but it's very, very likely to happen. Swain, what's your vibe on this one? Where do you see these two teams?
Yeah, I'm probably similar. I think you look at, it's funny that Lance Leipold said today that Iowa State's a program he wants to emulate. I mean, that's something that I've kind of mentioned to VIPs a lot is, hey, that should be the model that KU wants to go after. It's guys are staying in your program for a long time. You look at basically everyone on the two deep has been in the program for 2-3 years at Iowa State, which means they have a great understanding of the scheme and the tweaks that can happen. I do think they are a little bit further along. And I think across the Big 12, this is kind of statement weekend. You think about TCU and Oklahoma, how good is TCU? You think about K-State and Texas Tech, Iowa State, Kansas. Like this across the Big 12 is a huge weekend in terms of learning where programs are at. And I think we'll know a lot about what the second half of the season will look like for Kansas after Saturday. I do think this is probably where Kansas gets its first loss. I just think that this is a tough test for the offense. And I think, Kent, you're right. If they don't have a B-plus game on Saturday, I think it's going to be really hard to win because Iowa State, although their offense, it might stink. We don't know. I think we'll learn more about them this weekend. And if KU defensively does not play well, I have a hard time seeing a victory here for Kansas. So I think my pick is Iowa State 35, Kansas 31.
I was right with you. If immediately after the game, I kind of had vibes of like I think the Cinderella story stops a little bit and takes a break. But just with circumstantial stuff, I think Kansas is about to play their best game of the year. I think the best version of Kansas football you've seen to this point is showing up at Memorial Stadium against Iowa State this week. I think it might be enough. Honestly, I just think like when I kind of talked about it. I think this team's still under the radar enough, and there's a layer of disrespect now that they can play. They've dealt with being the favorite and winning a game and taking care of business. They didn't close it out to the way they wanted it. They didn't execute the way they wanted, and they still won the football game. You gave your coaching staff plenty of things to fix throughout the week, plenty of things to emphasize to refocus this football team. And by the way, you're an underdog at home. You're not favored in this game. I just think that there's enough circumstantially where I'm just sitting there going, we've seen what this culture has done. We've seen this process-oriented, group be able to kind of keep this group focused. They've had a lot of distractions the last 3 weeks. I mean, Lance Leipold's name was up, that noise hasn't really been there this week as much as it was 2 weeks ago when Scott Frost got fired. The ranking stuff, like there's plenty of they've had more distractions than they're having this week. It's kind of quiet on that front relative to everything that you've just saw. And the expectation is they're going to lose. I just think that you are going to get a very focused version of this football team this week. I think this is the best version you're going to see from the first 5 weeks. And I think it's enough to beat Iowa State because of all the things we talk about. I don't think they're world beaters. I think they're a very, very, very solid football team. And I think that defense is going to give the Kansas group a lot of trouble. But I think this group's going to do enough to pull it out. I have it 31-28 Kansas. I'm surprised. Like if you'd asked me initially on Saturday, I wouldn't have said this. But I feel good. I have a good feeling about this game, and I think that there's enough to lock this group in.
Yeah, Ken, two things that I'm really curious about. By the way, one, I stopped doing the quarterback hand motions today, not because you bullied me out of doing them, but because I got a flu shot and my arm hurts. So that's the only reason. They will be back in the next game. All right, two things. One, it doesn't always look like that, Kent. For our podcast listeners, Kent is being hilarious.
I'm mocking him,
Yes. One is I'm so curious about personnel groupings. I think you both have kind of mentioned this. Wouldn't shock me if we see a lot more of like multiple wide receiver sets. And Michael, I remember you, I think, writing about this last year. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe I'm just giving you credit because you usually hone in on this stuff. But when KU kind of switched it up and went from going a little bit more run heavy to putting more wide receivers on the field, maybe I'm thinking back to Les Miles when they started doing that. I don't know.
That.
It all blends together. Very curious to see if they go more wide receivers. And then also, KU's been a great third down team all season, which, by the way, just to finish the thought, needs blocking from the wide receivers. They have to be really, really good at that. All year, KU's been good on third downs. I think the reason why is because they've been good on first and second down, so they've gotten into a lot of third and fourth and short. To me, most important game of the season, bar none, to this point, obviously, of converting third and fourth downs. Like, I think they're going to be in a lot of third and shorts, fourth and shorts. I don't know that this is a team, Kent, like you were talking about, that you just want to line up and try and run it on them. At least straightforward. You don't want to Les Miles it. I think you want to do something creative or schematic or to give yourself an advantage. And I think that's where this game is won. Like, if we come back here and Kansas was 4 of 15 or something on third down, then I think obviously Kansas lost. But if Kansas 8 of 12, something like that on third downs, and they got into a lot of third and shorts, then I think they're going to win this game. That's where I see it at least.
One more thing. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring a Will McDonald to the conversation here.
He's still in college.
He's still in college, and he might break Von Miller's Big 12 sack record. He is so close to it. And that is the guy that I look at on Saturday. Earl Bostic did not have a great game last week. And that is the one guy, and I'm fascinated to talk to him Wednesday and see where his mindset's at after a bad game, right? His first one of the season, I would say. Will McDonald's a game wrecker. And if he has a really good game and he draws 2 holding calls, those are 2 drives I think you can say KU's going to punt or settle for a field goal. And I think he's the one guy that if Kansas can stop on Iowa State's defense, things are going to get a lot easier in terms of their ability to throw the ball and give Jalen Daniels time. Because what we haven't really seen so far this season is Jalen being forced to throw while also being under pressure. It just hasn't been a ton of those situations, I think, this year. He's been under pressure and made plays, but times when maybe he doesn't have to throw. And what happens when it's third and long and Will McDonald is bearing down on him? What happens? I think those, for me, are some of the moments where I think this game will be won or lost, because that's what's going to determine, is this a B+ or higher game, or is this a B or lower game for the offense?
Real quick before we get out of here too, I know we've said like 6 times on the show. I think this could be a Jared Casey lining up as an H-back type of game. I think he can kind of help them account for some of the, trying to change some gaps and add some gaps in the run game with the front that Iowa State uses. You've got to get creative. You're going to have to pull some tackles to create some gaps and to add some gaps that you're going to force Iowa State to fill. But also you can do that with an H fullback type player. I think that could be Jared Casey. That could be a place that he kind of gets introduced as well. So yeah, maybe it's 3 receivers, Jared Casey, and a running back. Could be a little bit more of that, but you're seeing him more in the backfield. So you're getting three receivers kind of out there and some of those kind of stuff.
That sounds like a bad sitcom, Ken. 3 receivers, Jared Casey, and a running back. I would watch that though. Actually, I think I would watch a couple episodes of that.
That is totally on Hulu. This is on YouTube though. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Thanks to Michael Swain for coming and hanging out. Go subscribe to 24/7 Sports. It is absolutely outstanding. Mike.
Nope.
He goes by Michael. Kent showed impressive, shocking restraint by waiting this long to do that. I don't even know if that was intentional or if he just thought about it on the spot.
Michael does a great job, and I really just wanted to troll him before we get out of here. But we are getting out of here. That's been Booth Review. We will talk to you after the KU Iowa State game. Catch you.